All right, y'all, welcome back. We are back in the parking garage once again. I just spent like an hour trying to get this microphone to work, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about loop jumps today and how to learn a loop. But specifically, I'm going to talk about how to learn a loop from a traditional entry, which is either like a long edge where you see them kind of hold this position and then they just pick up into a jump, or from a crossover. I know that a lot of people, when they're first starting out, they like to do the inner forward 3-turn, which usually looks like that, you know? And I see a lot of people who can do the inner forward 3-turn, but then they kind of struggle to actually do the loop from another entrance. And that's because they don't know how to use that edge to generate the momentum. They're just kind of pushing into it with the 3-turn and starting that momentum from that 3-turn. And for a very long time, I genuinely did not understand how you could possibly do a loop just from starting like this, just from standing. And I was like, I will never figure this out. And one day, I just was like, whatever, we're just gonna try, we're gonna figure it out. And lo and behold, that day, my loop went from looking something like this to something like this. So it really is one of those things that once it clicks, and then you can do it from anything. And so I'm going to talk to you today about how I made that click and how I would go about learning it if you are in the same kind of situation with your loop jump. So first off, prerequisites. Obviously, you want to have your backward crossover, especially your counterclockwise. You especially want to have the backward crossover in whichever direction you're going to jump. So I jump counterclockwise. So that means for me, I'm on a right outer back and a left inner back edge. Ideally, you should be able to do this both ways. Another prerequisite you want to have, which I took a very long time to learn and kind of avoided, is just learning how to glide backwards on one foot, either in your air position like this or kind of in an open H position. You want to have your upper body turn to the right, and so for me that would look like this. I go into it from a crossover, and I think that's the best way for this application. Just crossover, pick up your foot, crossover, pick up your foot, and just try to glide backwards like this. This is a little bit sketchy on a surface like this because there's a lot of bumps and stuff, so I'm not gonna do too much of that. You should also have your right outer back 3-turn. A lot of people do their 3-turn kind of like this, where they leave their free leg behind and then they pull it in. And that's a valid way to do a 3-turn, but not really for the loop jump. You don't really want to have your leg behind you at all for a loop jump, and you see some people that kind of have that technique, especially on roller skates and quad skates where it's a little harder to generate that rotation from an edge. You see people a lot of time let their leg come back behind to try to get it done, and you really don't want that to happen. I'll show you what the 3-turn should look like. It should look like this. You want to start from that cross position, lean into it, and then just pick up into a 3-turn. It sounds really easy, and once you figure it out, it is really easy, but I remember being in that situation of like, I cannot make this happen. How am I going to do this? And learning that 3-turn kind of took away some of the scariness of just trying to jump off of that edge. And it really helped me learn how to lean onto that edge and create some rotation, some momentum off of that. So I think that's a really helpful thing to be able to do. And the last prerequisite that I would suggest you have is actually a right inner forward 3-turn. Even though we're not doing the 3-turn entrance, I really like this style of 3-turn. I call it a closed 3-turn. I think that's what it would be called. But going from an open position and then turning into your air position or your H position. So you're letting your leg be behind you on the inner forward edge, and then whenever you flip that foot underneath you, you keep this free leg back over here. So it goes from behind you to in front of you. And you want to do the same thing with your upper body. So when you're going into that 3-turn, you'll probably be pulled a little bit over to your left side. And you want to make sure that you're using your hips and shoulders so that when you come out of that turn, that you're all the way pulled to the right. So you should try to like spot, like how I'm looking at the camera right now. Try to spot somewhere and keep your head looking right there. So another drill that I really like whenever you're kind of taking all of those components and turning them into an actual loop jump is to start with a double 3-turn. So both of the 3-turns that I talked about, the outer back and the inner forward, we're gonna do them consecutively without stopping. And that's gonna kind of mimic the rotation that you're gonna get in the loop jump. It's not gonna feel the exact same, and the technique isn't the exact same, but it's really similar enough that if you're just trying to start getting into it, this is how I would go about it. So I start from a backward crossover. I go into that position that I was talking about where I pick up, and then I do outer back, inner forward 3-turns. And what you really want to try to do, I don't really think that I even did this correctly, make sure that you try to keep your head over your right side. So when you're setting up here, let your body start to rotate and keep your head over your right shoulder pretty much. And then when you come back out, you should still be looking over your right side. So when you're on that inner forward edge, you want to try not to turn your body around on that edge and kind of have it go like that. You want to stay nice and set up over that right side the whole time. So when you come out of that back 3 turn, you're going to be still looking to the right. So if I'm starting here, facing backwards right here, I'd be looking to my right there. As I turn, I'm still looking to my right. Then as I turn again, I'm still looking to my right. Unlike the inner forward 3 turn I showed you earlier where you have your leg behind, that's a good drill for learning how to cross into that position, how to cross your legs in a jump. But you don't want to open up when you do the double 3 turn like that, because that's not how you do a loop. So you don't want to do that. You just want to try to pick it up almost like a twizzle. You can't really do super great twizzles on inline the way you can on ice, but if you are really skilled at it, you can. Definitely try to practice that if you want. Practicing twizzles in your air position, or more what I would call like an eagle position, where your leg is kind of wrapped and you bring your foot up the side. That's a really great drill for just your axis, your alignment, and knowing where you are over your right foot. Now you might still be like, I can't do this back 3 turn. I cannot do the 3 turn with my legs crossed. I need to push into it with that inner forward 3 to be able to do a loop. You don't, and I'll show you how. It is really tricky when you haven't learned it yet, but whenever it clicks, you will be like, oh wow, that was so easy. And what I did to make that click was I just started from a back crossover, like I said, but I tried to imagine that when I push this right leg underneath me, I'm going to lean onto it with my whole body. So not like this, but leaning over like a domino. I want my whole body to be leaning to the right like I would fall. But you're not gonna fall because you have that edge underneath you to catch you. So I start there, I just give it one good step out, bring in, and then I started just kind of leaning and trying to make that circle smaller and smaller. I didn't even start with a 3 turn. I literally just started trying to stay on that and make that edge a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. And eventually you'll start to feel where you have to lean to get that edge to tighten in, and then you can turn off of it. It also really helps if you just have like no hesitation. I know that it's kind of a scary position to be in, going backwards with your leg in front, because if you fall backwards, you don't have anything back there to catch you. But if you really just try to have no hesitation, and as soon as you pull that foot underneath you, you just lean onto that edge, you can make it happen, just like that. You really just have to find where it is so that you're comfortable doing that, because I think that most of the reason that people struggle with that is kind of a mental block and kind of a fear thing, and that's exactly what it was for me. Also, when I demonstrate this double 3 turn exercise, keep your head over the right. I always forget to do that, and so there's probably gonna be a few times in this video where I'm doing the 3 turn and I don't really keep my head over my right side. But it's definitely good practice too. It's not like 1000% necessary that you're always looking over your right side, but what it does is it keeps your body really set up over there. And the further that you let yourself drift to the left, the harder you're gonna have to pull yourself back over the right for the landing to have a successful landing. And so it's not like a deal breaker that you don't have your head over the right side the entire time, but you really want to prioritize that on the takeoff and on the landing. And so it's just easier to try to get used to having your head pointed to the right so that your upper body wants to stay pointed to the right. If you turn your head to the left, your shoulders usually want to turn with it. Now, when it comes to actually getting height out of a loop jump, there are kind of 2 schools of thought when it comes to jumping, and there's vaulting technique and jumping technique. And I think that they both have their pros and cons. I think vaulting technique is more efficient, but it can definitely be a little bit harder to control, in my opinion. And then there's jumping technique, which I think is a little bit more stable and a little bit easier to do, but it's not nearly as efficient, and it doesn't really make use of speed or gravity or anything to help you build momentum. So you're doing a lot more work when you're using jumping technique. And the difference between that and a loop jump is that for vaulting technique, what you want to happen is that you want your right leg to come back behind you almost kind of straight. You don't really have to bend your knees all that much. You want your leg to kind of swoop back on that edge so that you have a forward lean. So you're like really leaning over that edge. As that edge comes to a stop behind you, you kind of lift up over your hip. And the reason it's called vaulting technique is because it's like a pole vault. So in this case, your right leg is gonna be the pole. And you can kind of imagine when a pole vaulter vaults, they run out and they stick the pole in front of them and then they rise up on that pole. So you want the same thing to kind of happen where you're leaning forward and then you start to rise up over that hip. It's really hard to demonstrate without actual speed, and it's not something that you usually see a lot of in a single because you don't need it that much in a single, but I definitely think it would be a good idea to get that technique started a little bit. Even if you're not using it like a super forward lean and then you lift up into a huge single loop, just to be able to visualize that and understand how that's gonna happen is really gonna help you if you are going up to double or triple loops. Jumping technique, on the other hand, is more so just kind of leaning onto that edge, keeping your body straight up and down the entire time, and then bending your knee and jumping off of the edge with your knees. And I like a mixture of both. I think that you should jump a little bit with your knees, but I think you should also have that kind of takeoff angle. And one important thing I should mention about that takeoff angle is that you have a forward lean when you go into the jump, but as you start to pivot, you should be taking off with a bit of a backward lean. Now, you don't want your hips like out in front of you like this. I just can't demonstrate that without moving. But you want to have a slight backward lean on that skate. See, that's what would happen if I tried to demonstrate. There are definitely benefits to jumping technique and vaulting technique, and I think most skaters utilize a little bit of both. I don't think that there's many people who actually vault off of a completely straight leg for a loop jump. There are some, but it's a very classic technique. It takes a lot more time to master that kind of technique, in my opinion. Also, with inline skates, I think that the jumping technique is a little bit more necessary because it's a lot harder to get that moment with your edge to hook around and perfectly stop because you're not cutting into ice the same way you would with an ice blade. So I really like a lot of exercises that kind of encourage you to push that edge. So sometimes I just stand on my left foot and then really feel that push with my right outer back edge, and I want it to hook around just a little bit. Not like a circle, but I want it to make kind of a fish hook shape. And that fish hook shape is kind of a representation of you turning speed into rotation. And that's really important because if you can turn speed into rotation, you're a lot less limited by the kind of jumping technique that you have because you can always go into it a little bit faster and get a little bit more rotation out of it. So that really helps when you're trying to go up to multi-revolutional jumps like doubles, triples, and quads. You also see this technique on salchows. Actually, all jumps have this kind of vaulting technique at some point. For an axle, your leg would go out in front of you. That's the only one that I'm like really bad at, the kind of vaulting technique. For an axle, your leg would go out in front of you instead of behind you, but for all the other jumps, like say a salchow, you push that left leg back behind you. And so that kind of vaulting technique is pretty important in my opinion, and I think that that's a very good thing to establish early on so that it's not such a mental block when you get to bigger jumps. So now to kind of apply this to the double 3-turn exercise, what I would do is do a hopped 3-turn and then do it into the inner forward 3-turn. So I'll show you what that looks like. So start from your crossover, you're gonna hop and then turn. And really, if you can get that hop, I mean, I had more than enough height for a single loop with that hop. So the more that you can start to get that hop up, you will naturally kind of want to fold into the jump a little bit more and more. One really important part of the takeoff is to try to not let your legs uncross. So your free leg might come up to try to lift you into the jump a little bit, but you don't want it to swing out and around and behind you. Some people can use a technique where their leg kind of lifts up to the side a little bit, and I don't think that that's wrong by any means. It's actually more similar to how you would do a flip or a Lutz, and those are all kind of similar jumps in technique. But if you really want to stay over your right side super well, and that's a struggle that you have, you really want to try to keep your legs crossed so that as you start to pivot through, you're really just using that vaulting technique to lift you up into the air, and then you're just snapping from here to there. So you don't have to have your leg out to the side and then try to turn it in, but that is still a good skill to have to be able to pull from an open position to try to wrap into that jump like that. So honestly, I would just keep doing that drill. Do hop, hop. Honestly, I think that's kind of scarier than doing a regular loop. So if you can do that, I would just go for the loop, honestly. If you can turn into that jump too after you've come out of the backward hop and still turn for that 3-turn, you have the fundamentals to do it. So I would just go for it, honestly. Once you know how to create the momentum and create the edge on that takeoff, it's really a very easy jump to do. Now, if you want to do the inner forward 3-turn entrance, I'll take it back to this inner forward 3-turn drill that I did, where you come out and you land in your kind of air position or your eagle position. You really need to make sure that you're doing your 3-turn like that. You cannot have your leg out to the side, even if it's in front. If it's out here, you're not gonna have any kind of control on that edge. You're not gonna be able to bend into the edge because you're gonna wanna collapse onto an inside edge. So you really need to make sure that you're coming out of that leaned over your right side still. And you want to have these legs crossed when you take off. It doesn't have to be like ankles together, legs crossed, but you want to have them at least crossed a little bit. And once you know how to bend into that edge from a crossover, it'll make it a lot more simple to do it from a 3-turn. But I actually still think the 3-turn is pretty tricky, because doing this 3-turn correctly is not the easiest thing for most people, and it's still a little bit wishy-washy for me sometimes. So I don't like that entrance. I don't think it really helps you get that much rotation and momentum. I would prefer to do like a double 3-turn, like do the drill into the jump, so like turn, turn like that. Or else whenever I try to do the 3-turn straight up, and let's try one, I usually kind of mess up the technique a little bit. I mean, that wasn't bad, but didn't feel super in control. I felt like I was kind of just like flinging myself up into the air. And so that crossover entrance just gives you so much more stability, because you decide when you're gonna bend into that edge, and you decide when it's gonna go up into the air. It's not kind of set in stone by that first push off of the 3-turn. Okay, I think that's gonna be all. I'm gonna try to make this a little bit of a shorter one and not go into like every single detail ever about loops and then just ramble around for an hour. Hopefully this helped you a little bit with your loop takeoff. Let me know if there's any questions, if you want any clarifications on something regarding technique, or if you just have any questions, if you're struggling with something and you want some advice, let me know in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.